This is the Media Police Post, broadcasting from the Fort Hall School of Government in Nairobi, Kenya. In this show, we police the state of truth in the Republic. And because truth is communicated to us by journalists and analysts, we have made it our civic duty to put it to the test. We advance from two confirmed truths about the media. One, and according to Roger Stone, the media is either lazy or evil. And for the most part, it is both evil and lazy. That is why the truth, their truth, must be put to a test.
And two, that journalism is verified gossip. In fact, what is presented to us as news analysis is gossip that has been verified by journalists. This gossip has to be ground-truthed. We will assess the state of truth in what they submit to the Republic, and we will pass verdict on what is true and what is not. For the record, we are not journalists. We are thinkers. We are not lazy or evil, and we do not verify gossip. What we give you is the truth that sets you free.
On today's show, we will discuss ideas that reflect unformed and uninformed opinions, and ideas that made you stupid. Narratives that fell into the cognitive trap of we see things as we are, not as they are. Narratives based on conjecture history, and those that smack of envelope journalism. Welcome, AX and Ms. K.
Thank you. So allow me to kick us off. Last week, Moses Kuria urged constituents in the president's backyard to support Arab Ruto because RAILA was uncircumcised. And he says this because in 1969, an oath witnessed by Gema people was taken in which the leaders vowed to never support an uncircumcised leader for president, or so the legend goes. But because RAILA allegedly has more skin in the game, he is illegitimate and therefore cannot be voted in as president? Yet this assessment comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the 1969 oath. And today I would like to set the record straight by explaining what Kuria was trying to do and why he was wrong. Kuria was trying to persuade his voters through rhetoric. In rhetoric, or the art of talking, Aristotle identifies three persuasive devices: pathos, logos, and ethos. Pathos means making an appeal to emotion, and logos means making an appeal using the facts. But Kuria used none of these. Instead, he sought to use ethos. Ethos makes an appeal on the character of the speaker, the credibility of their sources, or ethical arguments to present a persuasive argument. Sources and arguments like the 1969 oath. This oath was the credible source upon which Kuria hung his support of William Arap Ruto and encouraged Gema to do the same. However, referencing the oath may have served another purpose. Is it possible that this oath is Kuria's and therefore Arap Ruto's answer to the President's Sagana 3 declaration in support of Raila Odinga? I ask because when counteracting an argument using ethos, one needs to use authorities of an equivalent or greater weight. And in citing an agreement from when Mzee Jomo stood tall as Gema's supreme leader, is UDA attempting to overwrite President Uhuru's Sagana 3 declaration by appealing to a higher, allegedly more credible authority? Now, this might have worked had Kuria not forgotten to check his sources. As I said, ethos is about making an appeal based on the credibility of your sources, and this credibility will differ based on your audience. For example, a child is more likely to be persuaded by Cocomelon than by Arap Ruto himself, and rightly so, given how much thought goes into Cocomelon. Likewise, an oath from 1969 is unlikely to bind voters in 2022. Thinking otherwise is where Arap Ruto went wrong. Why? First, the context of the 1969 oath was the 1969 elections. Once those elections ended, one could argue that the oath ceased to apply. And even if the oath still applied, the oath would only bind those who took it. For at its core, the oath is a contract, and the doctrine of privity of contract prevents a contract from imposing obligations upon any person who is not a party to that document, which means that 2 generations of Gema are not bound by this oath. Millions of people who are now the majority of this bloc. Second, the alleged architect of the 1969 oath did not view oaths in the same way Arap Ruto does. Instead of being an absolute obligation on pain of death, oaths were, according to Jomo Kenyatta in Facing Mount Kenya, a statement of purpose, holding Kikuyus together in action. He frequently referred to them as symbols of the oath, as what bound Kikuyu together. This meant that the purpose of the oath was more important than the oath itself. And it is clear that the 1969 oath was purposed not only to bind Gema together in 1969 and for 1969, but to ensure that Gema was thinking about who is best served to realize their interests. Therefore, if Arap Ruto wishes to invoke this oath, then he should invoke it correctly. He should have reminded Gema that their duty is to community was not to prevent the rise of an uncircumcised president, but the rise of a president who would not see to their interests. And asked if this man is William Arap Ruto, cut or uncut, they should have definitely considered.
You know, AX, speaking of authorities and oaths, William Ruto lacks the moral authority to talk to us about oaths since he hasn't kept the oath he took when he came into office.
Yes.
To defend the Constitution and act in the best interests of country.
Wow. Well, this Saturday, March 26th is the deadline for the submission of party lists. A party list is a term used for the register of members of a political party. This means that by Saturday, all political people have to decide which party they are in. And if the Tanga MPs have not resigned from Jubilee and joined UDA by Saturday, they will be locked in Jubilee. That is the law. That is why Kiambu Senator Kimani Wamatangi registered in UDA using his ID card and registered as a member of Jubilee using his passport.
Wamatangi tuko na ripoti ya kwamba amejiandikisha katika Jubilee kupitia National ID. Amejiandikisha katika UDA kupitia passport yake ya Kenya. Hiyo ni ukora na anaweza kuta ya kwamba hata kuwania kiti chochote Kenya hii itakuwa nini?
He's not sure. He's still weighing his options, but we will know by Saturday what he chooses. Because according to Section 28 of the Elections Act, any political party that wants to nominate a person for election in any position in the August 9th general election must submit a membership list to IEBC 120 days before the election. Now, 120 days to the election is April 9th, but 14 days before the party lists go to IEBC, they must first be submitted to the Registrar of Political Parties. This means that for IEBC to get the party lists on April 9th, they must first be submitted to Anderito on March 26th, that's this Saturday. So once these party lists are submitted, Jubilee, ODM, UDA, Wiper and KANU will have 1 month, that's April, in which to carry out the little general elections we call party primaries. So as the rest of the country will be holding the general election on August 9th, UDA and ODM/Azimio strongholds will be holding little general elections during the party primaries. We say this because if you win in these little general elections, then the election of August 9th will be just a formality. The party primaries will be the general election, and because the stakes are high, we want to predict that there will be violence. In 2017, there was violence in the ODM nominations and Jubilee party primaries. There will also be violence in 2022. Fact, this is because violence in party nominations is a problem of scarcity, regardless of party. A UDA nomination in an Arap Ruto stronghold and an ODM or Azimio nomination in a RAILA stronghold are scarce resources. To get them, you must fight it out. If you introduce a scarce resource in an environment of scarcity, the result is conflict at zero option. For instance, if the position of governor is desired by 5 people and only 1 person can get it, the 5 must fight it out. And it will not matter who your father is or how much money you have in your bank account or even if you are a hustler. The only thing that will matter is your gangster index. Because in party nominations, there are no systems. The law is consensus by dominance and only the crooked survive. We would like to make one final projection for the next 3 weeks. So just as there will be a mass exodus into political parties this week to beat the deadline, there will be a mass exodus out of the party once the party primaries are concluded. This is because sometimes the party candidate is not necessarily the popular candidate, and maybe the third force in the 2022 election may be a party called independent.
Yes.
Now, in October of 1972, one of Israel's brightest generals, 44-year-old Eli Zera, was promoted to oversee the Directorate of Military Intelligence in Israel. This directorate was responsible for warning of possible attacks. Eli Zera's strategy was pegged on a strict formula he developed known as the concept. It was based on three major assumptions: that Egypt needed a superior air force to that of Israel, that Egypt needed long-range missiles that could reach Tel Aviv to deter Israeli attacks on key Egyptian targets, and thirdly, the concept also assumed that Syria would not go to war without Egypt. Now, the basis of Eli Zera's assumptions was intelligence reports that was leaked to Israel by an Egyptian double-agent spy, Ashraf Marwan, who was the son-in-law of Gamal Abdel Nasser and a close advisor to Anwar Sadat. The Egyptian intelligence implanting a double agent is a traditional Russian tactic in which the agent feeds his victim with 95% of accurate information and at the critical moment conveys false but critical data. This is known as strategic deception. In early 1973, large numbers of Egyptian troops began amassing along Israel's border. Israel's spies warned that Egypt planned to invade in mid-May of 1973. So on April 18th, Israel's Prime Minister, Golda Meir, gathered her top advisors. The military chief of staff and the head of Mossad both said an Egyptian attack was a real possibility and the nation needed to prepare. The Prime Minister then turned to Eli Zera for his assessment. Zera disagreed based on the concept. As long as Egypt didn't have a powerful air force and missiles capable of reaching Tel Aviv, then the odds of an invasion were very low in his assessment. The Prime Minister nonetheless ordered defensive preparations be put in place and to ready the army for war. Millions of dollars went into this, but the attack never materialized, and the government soon had to reverse their public declarations. Fast forward October of 1973, 6 months after Eli Zera predicted odds of war were very low, and 5 days before the holy day of Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. A young Israeli intelligence officer named Benjamin Samantov sent a warning that Egypt was on the move, and it was the largest buildup of equipment that soldiers on the front lines had ever seen. Zera had received a number of similar reports like this in the preceding week, but they didn't cause him much concern, convinced that Egypt still didn't have enough planes or missiles to defeat Israel. On October 2nd and 3rd, 1973, sightings of Egyptian troops increased and word came of activity on the border with Syria. Alarmed, the Prime Minister called another meeting. Zera once again counseled that there was no reason to be concerned. This time, the military experts who had disagreed with Zera 6 months earlier followed his lead. In the morning of Friday, October 5th, the day before Yom Kippur, the Prime Minister asked for an update. The military chief of staff now was also reluctant to mobilize the army on Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the calendar. And so the next morning, the first full day of Yom Kippur, by the afternoon, Egypt had entered Israeli territory, and on the other side of the country, Syria struck simultaneously. It took 3 days for Israel to halt the Egyptian advance and 2 days to organize a counterstrike against Syria. In the fullness of time, Israel was able to turn the war around, but many historians agree that even a quarter century later, the Yom Kippur War remains the most traumatic phase in Israel's history. There are 2 key lessons for us to take away from this history. We learn that it is important for the head of state to be the decider-in-chief. The buck stops with him or her. As decider-in-chief, when new and more up-to-date information is presented and the facts change, the president must change his mind. So, if Uhuru Kenyatta promised William Ruto the presidency, but the facts from intelligence have changed, Uhuru had no choice but to change his mind as well. Niccolo Machiavelli said that a prudent leader will not and should not observe his promises, when such observance will work against him and when the reasons for making the promise are no longer valid.
Okay.
If all men were good, this precept would not be good. But since men are evil and will not keep their word with you, you shouldn't keep yours to them. The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present.
Yeah.
Finally, the fact that Ashraf Marwan was an Egyptian double agent, and yet the Israelis based their entire strategy on the information he provided, this reinforces a lesson which Professor Mutai asserted yesterday on damaging ignorance, that you cannot rely on the constituency of your enemy to win the war. And this is a lesson for Arap Ruto.
And this is a question to the cleverness of William Ruto. How do you hedge a bet using the constituency of your opponent?
Yeah.
How do you say I'll become president?
Yes.
By using
Someone else's constituency.
someone else's constituency and expect that constituency to be consistent throughout. Now, if you have the deceit hypothesis factored into that,
Yes.
and if I was William Ruto, I would be very careful.
Thank you for joining us on the Media Police Post. See you next Monday. Journalists, you've been put on notice.